Why are so many people suffering? Why do we have such high inflation? Why does it seem like our politicians and the media is lying to us? Well, they are, unfortunately. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is they've been spending so much money and getting us into huge debt, focusing on colonialism and forever wars to try to extract resources from other countries, rather than building trade alliances and partnerships and investing in our own people, our own country. We have so much creativity in this country and it's all gone to waste. We have young people who can't afford college. We have homelessness, drug addiction, just a lot of social problems, and the politicians don't care because they're focused on taking money from lobbyists who are trying to make money from wars and colonialism. But I want to give you a couple details. I did not follow the US wars at all, although I knew that we were like an imperialist country, colonialist country, and that they were not telling us the truth. Like, why are we in Libya? Why are we in Syria? Like, why are we bombing these places? Why were we in Iraq and Afghanistan? Like, there was never any reason. There were never any weapons of mass destruction, and that was known from the beginning. But you're never allowed to talk about it. So they're gaslighting us and they're lying to us. And I think it's important that people know because there are elections coming up. And we think we have to get rid of all of these liars, because they don't care. Let's just go into some details here. And I'm going to be using the General Accounting Office report, a Senate Armed Forces Committee hearing, Judge Napolitano interviewing Larry Johnson, a former CIA intelligence analyst, and a clip from Daniel Davis interviewing also Larry Johnson. Daniel Davis has a Bronze Star Medal for Valor in Iraq, a Bronze Star for service in Afghanistan. These people are very committed to America and they have some inside knowledge that they're going to share, which is not just a bunch of lies. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this video and be like, is this really true? Okay. So let's start with the Afghanistan. Now, I've talked to so many people who are like, yeah, let's get those bad, evil Russians. They just attacked Ukraine out of the blue for no good reasons. They're going to take over Europe. They want to take over the world. We got to stop these Russians. But that was never, for me, having dug into the reasons that Russia went into just the eastern part of Ukraine is because the U.S. has been meddling in Ukraine and doing military drills, having NATO do military drills with Ukraine right on Russia's border. That would be like China or Russia doing military drills with Mexico right on our border and Texas or Canada. Like, we wouldn't like that either, right? And so Russia has been working for 10 years to try to get them to stop, and they wouldn't. So they finally invaded, but they're not trying to take over anything. In fact, everything we've been told was a lie. What I want to play for you now is a Armed Services Committee hearing where Eric Schmidt, senator from Missouri, is asking Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and I love his name, Lloyd Austin. He's such a handsome, charismatic man. I do like him, and I like that he has a hard time lying. I like him that he has a hard time lying. He's like super honest. He's trying to lie and evade, but he has a hard time doing it. He's the Defense Secretary, and I love his name, Lloyd Austin. He sounds so royal. But anyway, in this clip that I'm going to play for you, he's asked, what is the end game in Ukraine? Basically, like, why are we there? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we know when our mission is done? Because remember, we were told we had to stop these bad Russians from taking over the world. So I expected him to say, we got to stop these Russians from taking over the world. But that's not what he said. What did he say? This is going to be like a 5-minute clip. And all these clips I'm going to show you, they're going to be in the description. You can listen to the original video. So what did he actually say? Why are we in Ukraine? Like, how do we know when we're done? What is the end game in Ukraine?
what is America's objective? What are we trying to do? Now, last month at a congressional hearing, at a Senate hearing, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was asked point blank, what is America's objective in here? Now, as you're watching this clip here, note how painful and difficult it is for Austin to explain anything.
So what does victory look like for Ukraine? How do you define victory?
You may have heard me say this earlier, Senator, but we've said from the very beginning that what we want to see is a Ukraine that's a democratic country that has that is independent and has the ability to protect its sovereign territory, to defend its sovereign territory, and to deter aggression.
Does that mean Crimea is part of Ukraine?
Crimea is a part of Ukraine.
Well, okay, right. But in order for the war to be over, does Ukraine have to control Crimea?
In terms of how things transition going forward, I would not want to predict what President Zelensky will decide.
I think part of the problem, with all due respect, is that this administration has not articulated what an exit strategy is. To me, this is a blank check for a war that, without any clearly defined goals, will be endless.
Which is exactly where we are. And I mean, what really jumped out at me at the first part was when the senator asked him, what does a Ukraine win look like? He didn't even describe a win. He just said, well, we want them to be this aspirational stuff. And he had a hard time getting that out.
Yeah, well, not surprising. I had several buddies that served under him when he was in Afghanistan. If you're going to measure intellectual firepower in terms of caliber, he's a 22 short, okay?
22 short.
Yeah, poof, not a lot of pop and zing behind that. Look, the real objective of the United States with this whole Ukraine operation was to create the Ukrainian army as a military proxy. And we worked aggressively at that over the last, the exercises started back in 2008, I believe. But the joint military exercises with both EUCOM and with NATO, they were conducting 2 or 3 a year at least. And these were not just, these were both field training exercises as well as the desktop exercises. And some of the training that was included by NATO was cyber warfare. Now, NATO always claims to be a defensive organization, but this cyber warfare is not defensive. That's an offensive operation. And the intent was to create Ukraine as a battering ram that would hit Russia. And the intelligence analysts, for whatever reason, genuinely believed that if we put enough combined economic and military pressure on Russia, it would crack. It would force Putin from office. It would cause a split in the military and in the political elite, and that therefore we would get access. This is all about money, because Russia is the #1 country in the world in terms of natural resources. It doesn't need to import a single thing in order to run all of its industries. It's the only, unlike China, who's an industrial giant, but China has to rely upon the West to produce a commercial airliner, not Russia. Russia produced its first commercial airliner in 2023 entirely with its own parts and entirely domestically. And so when you look at the uranium, the gold, the oil, the gas, the natural gas, the aluminum, the nickel,
lumber, all that.
and all the rare earth minerals, good God, it's a treasure mine. And the West has been wanting.
The truth of it is that Russia has been extremely patient with the US and NATO's unrelenting attack for over 10 years by doing these joint military exercises, major joint military exercises that US and NATO were doing in Ukraine. Guys, how would we like it if China and Russia were doing joint military exercises with Mexico down in Tijuana or on the border, on the Canadian border? How would we like that? It's very threatening. That's not what they tell you in the media. There's a lot of propaganda in the media, but anyway, They were doing 2 to 3 exercises a month, like a lot. And Russia kept saying, don't do it, please stop. Now, I want to point out something else. Russia and China are not interested in taking over anything. They're very interested in building trade, in building partnerships and alliances. And the West, by the West, I mean the US and Europe and NATO is beholden to the US. I mean, the US promised to protect Europe if they were part of NATO. So Europe has to kind of go along with what the US kind of the bully wants to do. And the West has been spending so much money and going into debt. We're going into debt to have all these bases and start all these wars and take out elected officials, put in our own people, and try to start wars everywhere, all over the world, pretty much, instead of investing in our future like Russia and China are doing. Russia and China, you might want to look up something called the Belt and Road Initiative, which I've been just kind of looking into this a little bit over the last few months. Like, I'm very interested in this. It's called and I'm going to put the link in the description, China's Massive Belt and Road Initiative. They don't want to take over the world. They want to build alliances with the world. They have been working for over 10 years on this humongous project involving Africa, the Middle East, Russia, China, India. Iran just recently joined it. It is called the New Silk Road. It is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever conceived. I wish we would do this. Launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping, the vast collection of development and investment initiatives was originally devised to link East Asia and Europe through physical infrastructure. But the project has expanded to Africa, Oceania, and Latin America. Now, there are people who don't really like this, who have all problems with it, but the point is that they're building alliances, they're building trade. Russia and China are now very close partners. They have a lot of business interests, joint ventures, military, economic, financial. And one more thing I want to point out here is that when Russia went into Ukraine to defend their own sovereignty, and they want Eastern Ukraine, the Eastern Ukrainians have always been Russians. They're ethnic Russians. I don't think people realize that the Nazis in Ukraine have been killing these ethnic Russians for years, and that Ukraine is very corrupt. And the West is using Ukraine to try to weaken Russia to get all of Russia's resources. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, what did the US do? They put sanctions on Russia and froze Russian assets. Most of these Russian assets are in European banks. But what that has done, all of these sanctions that we have put on Iran, China, Russia, it has made them go, whoa, we cannot trust the US. They don't want to work with us. We got to work together. So we've pushed these people into working together, and they wanted to include us. Russia has been wanting to be part of trading with us for a long time. But we always kept them at bay as these bad Russians because we wanted to overtake them. We didn't want to treat them as equals. So we're causing our own demise. But it's like part of the empire in decline. I'm telling you this because we are an empire in decline. Make your financial and economic decisions accordingly. But just so you know, they're not going to come on and tell us this, I mean, fortunately, YouTube, you can watch all these interviews by these colonels. You can find out what's happening with the ICC, I'm obviously not a military analyst, but if you follow some of the information, other news outlets in other countries like Al Jazeera, which by the way was just kicked out of Israel, right before Israel invaded Rafah, they just kicked that, If you look at when they don't want you to tell stuff, the government, you know that they're hiding something. and they have a hard time lying. That's why I like Lloyd Austin, because he has a hard time lying. These politicians are super smooth. I'm a really bad liar too. Most people are. But let me get back on the point. So the Russians have been under attack for a long time, and because the US would never allow them to join them, even though Russia had this partnership with Europe and they were selling gas to Germany through the Nord Stream pipeline, but the US blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. They used I believe it was a company in the Netherlands to do it. That's why they do not want it investigated at all, because they're trying to hurt Russia. But Germany is still buying Russian gas, but they're buying it through India, so they're paying more money. The point of the war in Ukraine was to weaken Russia, but we didn't weaken Russia. Russia is not the Russia from 1850. They're a major industrialized powerhouse with strong alliances with China, and they're helping Iran. Iran is helping them, and they're all part of this Belt and Road Initiative. They're building infrastructure, they're building projects, they're forging alliances with countries in Africa, resource-rich countries. And I do not know if they're going to plunder them or not. I do not know any of the details of this, but I think it's very exciting to have these projects where people are working together, being creative, building something, creating something, rather than the US. And I'm not talking about you guys or me, our politicians, they're all these old-aged, autocratic neocons. They call them neocons. I think it means warmongers. I don't know what neocons means, but I think it means warmongers. And they're running around trying to think like, beating our chest, we're the big guys, we're going to tell you what to do. So Janet Yellen goes to China and tells China not to trade with Russia, tells China to cut back on their production, and in the same breath, putting military base and selling and putting more equipment in Taiwan, which is part of China, like antagonizing them. Like the US diplomatic skills are pretty low, because they're like, we're Tarzan, we're going to rule the world, we're going to tell you what to do. But what we really need to do is focus on our own infrastructure, like these countries are doing, and start building trade alliances. But they're not, and they're lying to us. That's what I want you guys to know. So, the Royal United Services Institute had an article. I did not look this up, by the way. I'm just reading off my notes, which says that the West has been blinded by looking at the war in Ukraine as a war of maneuver in conventional Western terms, but the Russians are conducting a war of attrition. And Russia's winning. The media has been lying to us all along. Russia has been winning. They're doing a war of attrition. They're not going to go. They just want the eastern part of Ukraine. They're not trying to start a world war. They're very busy building their alliances. And I believe this week Putin is celebrating a something or other. Again, I'm not a military analyst. I'm just a mom, okay? I'm just a mom who took some notes on this war stuff I've been learning about. But I tell you, when I listen to these generals speak, I'm like, I feel there's a truth there. When I listen to these politicians speak and they're so evasive and they seem so evil and none of it makes sense and they don't give reasons and they don't explain things, I'm like, I don't trust them. Now, the next part, I want to show you guys a video clip. This is very interesting. It's like I was saying, beating our chests, like we're the big America. And sometimes they say the US president is the most powerful man in the world. Well, not anymore. Our power is really declining, which we saw with the Iranian strike on Israel, where the Iranians spent like what, a few $100 million, and Israel and the US used all of their anti-missile defense systems and spent about $3 billion, it's estimated, and Iran hit the most defended place on earth, which is the air base in Israel where we have the F-35 bombers, fighter jets. That's why Israel didn't retaliate, because they can't. Neither the US and Israel is not strong enough against Iran now, okay? We are being shown, they're kicking our ass, guys. They're kicking our ass. Our military is weak. We are having trouble recruiting. I've talked to so many guys. I talked to guys in the military, but also from this, we have trouble recruiting. Just not just for the police force, because our country has so many uneducated, illiterate people and unfit, fat people. We're having trouble recruiting for the military, and a lot of guys, people don't want to go in the military because they don't feel the sense of cohesion and fighting for our country. So we do not have the military to fight out there in personnel, and our equipment is really old and outdated. The last time the U.S. won a war was probably World War II. We lost in Iraq, Afghanistan, and there's a big difference between the kind of equipment and preparation you need to be out in Afghanistan and Iraq versus fighting a modern peer military like the Russians. We have top military equipment. They're a nuclear power, do not forget. And the U.S. is stirring up all the stuff in Ukraine. They do have contractors and NATO and Foreign Legion in Ukraine. And the Russians have been extremely, extremely patient. Why? They don't want war. They're trying to just have this neutral part in Ukraine, and they're working on trade and alliances and infrastructure and projects and building things. Now, I'm going to play you a clip, and this is going to be a 5-minute clip where Mr. Johnson, Colonel Johnson, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's Larry Johnson and he's talking about the details of the state of our military equipment. And then at the end of that clip, you're going to hear, I think it's Tom Götz, asking Lloyd Austin to verify the information in the General Accounting Office report that only 29% of our F-35 planes are flyable. Our military equipment is very, very bad. So let's listen to that clip.
Patient with our provocations. And we've made a mistake that, there's a saying down in Latin America about people mistake being good with being a fool. Yeah. And we mistake Russia's patience as weakness. And it's anything but weakness. We don't recognize we're the weak ones. When you go through the information that comes out, it's like every Abrams tank that operates for 1 hour has to get 8 hours of maintenance. Think about that. Every F-16 that flies 1 hour, 17 hours of maintenance. We're spending $13 billion on an aircraft carrier. We've got F-35 jets. Only 29% of them are flyable. And we're out there beating our chest like we're, the Incredible Hulk.
You analogized earlier the war of attrition versus a war of maneuver. Does
Right.
the American military have the cultural mentality, the patience, and the equipment for a war of attrition?
Absolutely not. We wouldn't last a week. We would not last a week. We might get 2 weeks maybe. But that's it. No. As I pointed out, we've got all this expensive weaponry, like the M1 Abrams. So it's designed, we're going to run it for 1 hour, but then you got to take it back and you've got 8 hours of maintenance.
You weren't
think of that from a
exaggerating.
combat.
You weren't exaggerating when you said 1 hour of operation and then 8 hours of maintenance.
No, I'm not exaggerating. That's
Well,
GAO
that's
reports.
a piece of junk. Why do we have something like that?
Well, it made I guess General Dynamics or Raytheon, whoever made the tank, quite happy, and the shareholders quite happy. We've got a military that was built and designed to benefit members of Congress and to benefit shareholders. The equipment and weapons that we have deployed for the Army are not designed around a coherent strategy of having to fight a peer opponent. And so we've got all this terribly expensive, terribly sophisticated equipment that doesn't work. What the Ukrainians have reported with respect to all the Javelin missiles, anti-tank guided missiles that were put into theater. It turns out they were too damn complicated to use. And when they were used, they were not that effective. So that's why, I think the Ukrainians decided, well, let's just see if we can sell this junk on the international market and see if some other fool will buy it. Because it requires a whole variety of steps. It's not like picking, it's one thing to give somebody a revolver where all you got to do is, as long as it's loaded, pick it up, press the trigger, boom, it goes off. These aren't those kinds of weapon systems. You have to open tab A, slot tab C, open this slot, do that, and then calculate this, measure the weather. And so when you got something that requires 20 steps before you can fire it, not very useful in a combat environment.
Here's Congressman Matt Gaetz examining under oath an embarrassed and uncomfortable Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin about these jets that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Is the F-35 program a failure?
No, it's,
Okay, so let's go over, how much does an F-35 cost?
well, it depends on the variant, but,
100 million? Safe to say? 100 million a copy? Okay, so we just had the Air Force in here, and I said, what percentage of these F-35s are fully mission capable? And they said 29%. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment?
I don't have any basis to disagree
Okay.
with the Secretary.
So at 100 million a copy, 29% being fully mission capable, does that seem low to you?
It's a complex airframe, and again, there are a number of reasons why a platform could be not operational at any one given time. But
Right, but I mean, how
having
many?
said that, it is one of the best aircraft in the inventory.
The best aircraft in the inventory. Well, Mr. Secretary, there's a GAO report that takes a very different view. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter the GAO report entitled F-35 sustainment costs will continue to rise while planned use and availability have decreased.
Without objection, so ordered.
It reads, costs to sustain the F-35 fleet keep increasing from 1.1 trillion in 2018 to 1.58 trillion in 2023. Yet DoD plans to fly the F-35 less than originally estimated, partly because of reliability issues with the aircraft. The F-35's ability to perform its mission has also trended downward over the last 5 years. Is there any of that in the GAO report that you disagree with?
I don't know.
Okay, so how many $100 million paperweights do we own?
I would not categorize the F-35 as a paperweight.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of Matt Gaetz, that was a brilliant,
Yeah.
terrific examination, and the secretary looked foolish, ill at ease, indifferent, and ignorant.
Yeah. No, look, this. I've got a friend who's involved with the F-35 program at one of the U.S. Air Force bases. They're supposed to have 8. They've got 1. The other 7 haven't shown up because of software problems. So that's even less than the old 29%. What the United States has built is a very expensive military system that does not work in combat. And in contrast to what we had during World War II, where we were able to turn out airplanes in a single day.
So now it's obvious to the whole world, and especially because of social media, they can no longer control the narrative. I didn't even talk about what Israel is doing. That's a whole different topic, but we have all these students protesting. And just as I was making this video, I came across this clip that was saying that from Secular Talk, who I watch, is that pro-Palestine protesters are threatened with bankruptcy and homelessness. Now that you have students protesting against one of these wars, that's the war we're funding in Israel, these students are threatened with homelessness and bankruptcy. They're being expelled from school. And people are saying, oh, they're very violent. Well, and 99% of them are peaceful. That's number one. Number two, there are always going to be some rebel rousers in every group. And sometimes the opposition will plant rebel rousers in there, film that one person, and paint the entire group of thousands of people as being bad. That's part of the propaganda, or shifting the narrative. And then also what they they are focusing on the students rather than on why the students are protesting. It's all parcel of keeping the war machine going. Now, they want to ban TikTok. Why? I thought for a long time they want to ban TikTok because they're affiliated, like they're part of a Chinese company and they're spying on us. But no, it's because on TikTok, people are finding out what's going on in the world, what's going on in Palestine. They don't want us to know. They want us to be quiet sheeple. Remember, I, for sure, am part of the peasant class. I'm part of the peasant class, okay? We have the elites and we have the peasant class. And the elites do not give a shit about the peasant class. So they're going to try to gaslight us, control us, silence us, take away our rights, control our free speech. Thank God for YouTube. I'm surprised that YouTube is letting us say all this, frankly. I'm very grateful. And TikTok, these social media companies, they don't need to control the narrative. They just want to get money from view counts, thank God. But one more thing about the protesters is that we've never really had, peaceful protests when we made change, right? My understanding is that during the 1968 protests, everything was very peaceful until it got out of hand and they were kind of storming the White House. Even Rosa Parks was not a peaceful protester. She wasn't supposed to sit in the front of the bus, but she's like, I don't care. Sometimes these protesters do break laws. I'm not saying that, I don't think that they should ever harm anyone, hurt anyone, but these student protesters were not hurting anyone. It wasn't until the police started attacking them that they started acting out, I believe. I didn't follow the protesters that closely, but the idea should be that students on campus should be allowed to debate, express their ideas, express themselves. But the problem is that the moneyed interests are saying, we do not like this, shut this down. And the moneyed interests are the ones donating to the university so they can control the discourse. They have too much power. So when people protest, they do so peacefully, but if you try to shut people down, sometimes they get a little rowdy. But I think that 99% of the protests were peaceful, and that there were maybe 1% that were rebel rousers, but I have not seen a list of protesters that gives all the names and whether they were students or not. But I find that extremely concerning that pro-Palestine protesters are threatened with bankruptcy and homelessness, because that makes people afraid to protest. And see, our government is not here to control us. We're not here to make our politicians rich. This country was founded on our individual rights to sovereignty and free speech, and we need rules and laws so that we can coexist together and respect each other's rights, but not for the government to use our tax money to do colonialism projects, which are making us more enemies. Do you know how many enemies we're making right now? Trying to tell China what to do, trying to ruffle feathers in Taiwan, funding the genocide in Palestine, and all the military bases we have over there. I don't know if you know, is it Niger or Niger? It's this country in Africa. They just kicked the U.S. out. They kicked the U.S. military out. They invited Russia in. We're making a lot of enemies. And we're making a lot of enemies in the Middle East because, I'm from Germany. Germany, after the Holocaust, Germany should have given the Jews the best part of Germany, like the most beautiful forest, but they didn't. They put Israel in this Middle Eastern place, and Israel should have just learned to coexist with those Middle Easterners, with those Palestinians and those dark-skinned people they don't like, but they couldn't. It's part of their biblical stuff to just eliminate them. That's the problem. Israel doesn't want the Palestinians to coexist with them or have a two-state solution. So there's no answer. And these people are just warmongers. Why? Why can't we be like Russia, China, India, Iran? And they kept telling us Iran is an axis of evil. Now I'm questioning everything. I do not think Iran is very evil at all. Maybe North Korea isn't evil either. I think they've been lying to me for so long. I feel like an abused spouse. And that's what I'm going to end the video with.